So Rejoice, you may need to
you can start whenever you're ready.
So Rejoice, okay.
Yeah, you can start with the introduction.
Okay, that's fine. All right. Welcome to every one of you who are seated at the venue. You all hear me? Is the microphone on? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my name is Uche Okpara. I'm a senior lecturer in climate change, state fragility, and conflict at the Natural Resources Institute in the University of Greenwich in the UK. So I'm speaking to you from the UK right now. So thank you so much for joining us. Please, I want to encourage those online to stay muted, and you'll be asked to speak. That's if you're joining online, you'll be asked to speak when there's time to do that. So today we'll be focusing on defueling violent conflict and climate crisis in drylands. So dryland areas like Ramoja in Uganda and the Lake Chad region in Chad, Cameroon, Nigeria, and Niger are hotspots of climate crisis and violent conflict. So today you will hear 4 presentations on different aspects of climate and conflict relationship from scholars who have lived and worked in dangerous drylands. So finding ways to defuel violent conflict and climate crisis is complex, and the challenges in drylands are multifaceted, with several root causes and drivers, and this means that any action, to defuel conflict and climate crisis will require a combination of multiple complex context-specific initiatives. It will require, the interaction of multiple actors. It will require financing, political will, and the integration of multiple knowledge domains. So for this session, we have 90 minutes to engage, to interact, to brainstorm, and to chart ways forward. And each presentation will be for 20 minutes. So you will hear 4 presentations, and each will be for 20 minutes. And we will reserve 10 minutes in the end for questions, comments, and remarks. So the order in which we are going to present our talk today is as follows. Rejoice Papka is at the venue currently, so she'll talk about a social ecological systems approach in support of climate conflict analysis. Thereafter, Betty, speaking from Uganda, will unpack climate, food, and conflict relations in dryland Uganda. And then I'll be the third speaker. I will talk about thermal discomfort and conflict in drylands. And Abubakar, speaking from the UK, will talk about adaptation issues amongst different livelihood groups in conflict and climate context. So may I invite Rejoice Papka to take over at this point and talk about her work. So Rejoice, you have 20 minutes.
Thank you.
Sure.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Papka Rejoice. I'm a PhD student at the University of Greenwich, currently working on climate conflicts, peace and prosperity in the Lake Chad region. For the purpose of this conference, I will be taking you through a socio-ecological systems approach in support of climate conflict analysis in the drylands, focusing particularly on the Lake Chad region. Just an overview. So I will just give a brief introduction, talk about the Lake Chad, briefly talk about socio-ecological systems, how I applied a socio-ecological systems lens in climate conflict analysis in the region, just show you some pictures from the field, and then we'll talk about what value such an approach can provide rather when we are analyzing climate conflict situations. By way of introduction, I'm sure that it is not new to us that climate change remains a pressing issue, spanning across, so many scales, nationally, globally, locally, and the likes. And between the year 2011 to 2022, the emission of greenhouse gases, according to the IPCC report, stated that temperature, rose above 1.1 degrees Celsius. In 2022 as well, the global economic impact of violent conflicts, was estimated to cost 17.5 trillion, which is equivalent to $2,200 per individual. We can agree that conflict is pervasive, with 1 in 6 people living in conflict-affected zones, according to the ACLED. And also there has been 40% increase in conflict situations since the year 2022. The picture to your right, presents you with one of the reasons why we are focusing on the Lake Chad. In March of this year, I visited the Lake Chad region to carry out field work, research concerning my project. And as we're about to land, I looked out the window and I saw this. It was completely dry. There were no trees. And I wondered what else would I see, stepping into the region, being that I had not visited the region in about 12 years since when the conflict began. I would like to say that I'm particularly from the region and have been affected directly by these situations. So the Lake Chad region is particularly a dry area. It's an agrarian community with over 70% of its populace dependent on agriculture for survival, both for local economy and then for family consumption. The climate in this region is particularly described by 2 seasons. You have the dry season and the wet season, and the temperature ranges between 25 degrees being the lowest and 45 degrees being the highest. Climate change and violent conflict has been undermining progress in this region for over 10 years, as this region sits on a bed of thorns, I call it, with the issues of marginalization, poverty, environmental degradation, corruption, weak governance, as you can name it. And so these wicked problems have continued to pose unprecedented challenges, I would say, for decision makers, researchers, academics such as you and I, whilst we're trying to find feasible solutions that can drive prosperity in the region. And in the bit of doing this, I realized that so many literatures have looked at how climate change is driving conflict. Literatures are still looking at how conflict is making climate situations worse. But what I discovered was missing is there is an underexplored area in looking at how systems thinking approach, such as a socio-ecological systems lens, could help us when analyzing climate and conflict situations. So that's why I asked the question, what support can a socio-ecological systems lens offer when we're analyzing climate change and conflicts? Just to provide context, a socio-ecological systems approach is something similar to my right here. I would explain briefly. But it's important for us to note that systems consist of interconnected components, which have a particular purpose to serve the general body as a whole. And socio-ecological systems, is a kind of tool embedded in systems thinking, one that provides meaningful understanding in explaining how humans and society relate, or how humans and nature meet at the middle. Ostrom in 2009 argued that most natural resources, if not all, are embedded in complex socio-ecological systems, as they have the resource systems who provide units for the users of the resource, you have the governance systems, you have the resource actors, and also you have the system embedded within complex social, economic, and political factors. This model, or various models of this particular system thinking tool, exist. Some called the DPSIR, that's driver pressure impact state response. Some called the ecosystem services that have been used to analyze situations mostly regarding common pool or common property resources. However, there has been an involvement, with the application of the framework. Some have used it to now understand the impacts of COVID-19. Some have used it to understand armed conflicts within the Middle East, and some are still using it to understand land degradation. So the framework I present to you today is one that I developed using the lived experiences of the people living in the Lake Chad region, particularly Borno State. I had focus group discussions with people from Kalabalge, Magumeri, and Ngala. These communities are some of the most affected communities, by the impact of climate change and violent conflict. There are many other communities, but for the sake of this purpose, I would focus on these three. It is without a doubt that the Lake Chad region itself sits within, poverty, illiteracy, weak governance, and the likes, just I have mentioned. And within the socio-ecological systems, because this community is heavily agrarian, with 70% of its population dependent on agriculture for survival. In my discussion with the locals, they mentioned to me that their most important resource in the region are the forests, the water systems, and the land. However, these resource systems I have mentioned that make up the ecological system provide resource units, which provides livelihood and sustenance for the resource actors here that you have. Also, the presence of resource systems provides governance systems with the opportunities to provide rules and regulations for the users of the resource. Now, we know that climate change does not directly cause conflicts. I'm sure we know that climate change is not the direct cause of conflict, but the presence of intermediary factors, exacerbates climate situations causing conflict. Climate change, however, has impacted natural resources in this region. With the issue of declining rainfall, changing temperatures, it has led to drought, causing resources to deplete, and as well as, in some cases, disrupted ecosystem services. Similarly, it has caused, an increase in resource scarcity, causing conflicts and competition amongst resource users. We have the farmers' herders crisis, with people migrating up north, down south, looking for pasture for their livestock. On the other side, climate change has also, with the issue of climate change, because the Lake Chad governance system is weak and they are uncoordinated, it has overwhelmed the governance systems because of their lack of coordination, poor technology, there's a dearth of data as well. So these governance systems are finding it difficult to adapt to the issues of climate change. The issue of corruption has also made them divert climate finances, and as such, finding solutions to climate situations in the region has become difficult. It has also fostered investments with, the events of different actors talking about climate situations and how to mitigate them. Funds have been given with the presence of development actors in the region, providing briquettes to local actors to use instead of, charcoals that they use for biofuels and the likes. However, the locals are finding it difficult to use the briquettes because of the rate of poverty. The typical poor man in the region is unable to find food for himself, talk more of buying briquettes. So what they do is they go back to the environment, cut down trees, use the resources, to generate funds for their family and then for sustenance. Similarly, just like I have mentioned, it has disrupted livelihood. It has worsened the poverty situation for a region who depends on agriculture. There is nothing, to say about the situation of climate change in the region. It has also caused food security. In this instance, the Lake Chad region, particularly Borno State, provides things like rice, millet, sorghum for the entire Nigeria. And with the case of climate change at the moment, Nigeria is currently undergoing a serious case of food insecurity. However, this has also led to, creating rooms, or rather I would say an avenue for recruitment into rebel groups. In this instance, because majority of them depend on the environment and climate change has impacted, their livelihoods, a lot of them are induced to join rebel groups so that they could make money or they could make something just for ends to meet. We're also going to look at the reverse because yes, climate change is exacerbating conflict issues in the region, but conflicts in the region is also making worse climate situations. Let's start with the resources. The first one, total destruction of resources. Because of the conflict in the region that has been ongoing for 10 years plus, a lot of the resource users in the region or the locals in the region have now resorted to the environment. So for everything that they need, they resort to the environment because they cannot afford food, they have no money, they cut down trees to sell, these trees, make them into charcoal to sell them just so that they can have something to eat. Also, because of the high cost of cooking gas and erratic electricity in the region, a lot of them depend on the firewood so that they could use to cook their food. Secondly, it has also limited accessibility to natural resources. One of the findings I got from the field is that the insurgents in the region have now taken over, what I call ungoverned spaces. So they've taken over places where the government do not have any other presence because of conflict, and they now tax resource users to pay them money to have access into their resource systems. So if as a resource user, you do not pay tax, they would kill you, or they would, take you and then make you work for them forcefully. So there's also a case of forced labor in the situation. Then there is also the control and weaponization of natural resources. As a tool to destabilize the region, we have also noticed that armed opposition groups, in quote unquote here, I would call them Boko Haram, have now taken over resources. For instance, the Sambisa forest, which was a reserve and a tourist attraction. They have taken over that area where they use it as their training grounds. They also use it as avenues for illicit transportation, and distribution of drugs. They also use the area for what they call the purchase rather of small arms and light weapons, just so that they can have money to kind of like continue their activities in the region. Similarly, a particular local mentioned to me that one of the things that the armed groups do in the region is that they pour acids into their water systems, making the water systems completely useless. So even if you run away from the environment and you return, once you drink the water, that's the end. And also, they also throw dead bodies into their lakes, into the water systems and their dams, making it completely useless. On the other side, conflict is, affecting the social system. First, it has weakened environmental governance, and as such, the government systems in the region have deprioritized environmental issues, focusing more on the social issues of rebuilding schools, rebuilding hospitals, and the likes. Secondly, it has also destabilized, it has affected stabilization efforts. One of the things that a key informant mentioned to me was, as you're reconstructing and rebuilding things, the insurgents come back and then destroy the things that they are building. So practically making all efforts useless. Thirdly, it has also led to forced labor and sexual exploitation because of the vulnerability of the people in the region. Here, I will talk particularly about the military. The military used to clear the forest for visibility and for security purposes. However, in the case of conflict, and because of poor welfare services, the military have now taken over what we call charcoal production in the Lake Chad region, particularly Borno area. So they get into households, take abled men, send them to the forest to cut down trees for them, go to the market, sell these trees, and then return the funds that you have gotten. This is just so that you could have extra sources of income for their own welfare. Similarly, because of the vulnerability of the women in the area, because there's no food, they have no money. A lot of them have been sexually exploited by even development actors, the military, the armed groups themselves, and others. One of the things I'll also talk about is the unconventional and unsustainable practices. Due to the fact that conflict destabilizes people and causes migration and displacement, in an IDP camp, you have over 5,000 to 10,000 people in one locality, putting pressure on the limited resource already there. However, just because they cannot all get something from their resource, they now resort to deforestation, and then there's also competition amongst them for the resources. So in all, what I'm saying is, yes, climate change is making worse conflict situations. Yes, conflict is also, worsening climate situations in the region. So what value does such an approach offer, when we are looking at climate conflict situations? This is just an image, particularly what I was just talking about. So when I visited the field, the picture in the middle, when I was going to my hotel, I saw about 5 to 6 trucks with these, and I asked the driver, he mentioned to me that they sell it similarly, just what I mentioned, to make income and then to use it for cooking. Here, the locals explained to me that this area had lots of trees before, but when the IDPs moved into the metropolitan area, they cut down these, trees around the area just so that they could get something to sell in the market and also get food to eat. And this is an IDP camp, just opposite, the building here. So as I was going in, I saw a young girl who just came back from the forest and dropped this firewood that she had gotten. And she mentioned that she was going to sell them so that her family could have something to eat. This is just my discussion with the locals in the community. So what then does this approach offer us? Firstly, it provides a holistic view. So integrating socio-ecological systems thinking recognizes the connection between climate and conflict and the presence of external factors that affect system dynamics. Secondly, it rejects reductionism. In this case, it emphasizes equal attention to both human and society when making decisions. So we are not leaving one at the detriment of the other. Thirdly, it advocates for adaptive governance and transformative governance because systems are dynamic. And a little change or a little disturbance in one component can affect the entire system. So socio-ecological systems, lens calls for adaptive governance, one that is flexible, one that fosters collaborative learning, one that fosters knowledge co-creation and actions. Essentially, it considers the diverse perspectives of individuals across various fields. It also helps us understand root causes and its effects. Both climate change and conflict are not the direct or single causes, that we know. So such an approach helps us to understand ecological and social, situations that kind of worsen conflict risk in the region. So in sum, what am I saying? Defining climate change and conflict in the region would require such an approach, one that integrates humans as part of nature and not separate from them, one that places both humans and nature at the epicenter of decision-making. And I would end with a quote from Tonio Sadiq that said, "The relationship between people and nature must be one of interdependence. Otherwise, we risk overlooking something that the indigenous people already knew. We are nature and nature is us, and failing to see this truth is what brought us into this mess." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rejoice. That was an excellent one. Thank you so much. Please preserve your questions to the end. We'll have we'll have 10 minutes at the end of all the presentations to ask our questions. So next, Betty Nakiru, speaking from Uganda. Please, can you share your slides and take over the stage at this point? Betty, are you there? Hello, Betty. Are you there? You're muted. Unmute yourself. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, please take over. Please share
I'm
your
trying to
slides
share my
and,
screen, but okay.
You can see share screen there and use that to share your screen. Please, can we get the feedback from the hall? Can you all hear us?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So Betty, we are waiting.
Yes, I'm trying to come. Are we there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Can you share? Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Members, can you see my screen?
We can see your screen, but can you make it full screen, please?
That's what I want to do. Oh.
So make it full screen. If you could go beneath the slide.
Yes, what I'm trying to do. Oh yeah, okay, yeah, it is. This one. Are we there?
I think it's coming. I've not seen it yet.
Can you see that?
So it's not a full screen yet.
Oh.
So if you could go back to the box beneath the slide.
Oh God. Maybe I escape. Okay. It's yes, I'm right here on the slideshow, right?
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I selected. So,
but do you have the full screen on your own?
Yes, I have. I have on mine.
Okay, so we can see your presenter view. Can you reset this?
I have a reading view, and then there is slide sorter,
Okay,
normal,
so
then there is slideshow.
so click slideshow.
Yes, that's where I am.
Yeah, click slideshow. And let's see.
And
So
it's very
here,
clear from me.
so here, okay, I mean, if you want to present this way, that's fine, but we are seeing the presenter view.
We can start.
Well, you can just continue, just use that. That's fine.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. It is 4 o'clock in Uganda. I'm Betty Flora Nakiru. Sorry, it is 2:45, which is 3 in Uganda. I'm Betty Flora Nakiru, a PhD student at NRI. I am presenting unpacking climate conflict relations in Dryland, Uganda. That is how my presentation will go. We all know that climate change is partly contributed by atmospheric emissions of greenhouse gases, and this is with the scientific evidence for global warming now considered irreversible. In this study, I'm trying to see what are the research gaps. I have 3 reports that talk about a similar studies in relation to conflict, climate, and food security. The IPCC special report tries to link climate change and conflict in drylands, Africa, and trying to put important evidence on the marginalization of pastoralists, and then medium evidence on the roles of climate change contributing to conflict. Raleigh et al. Of 2015, also in Easy, the Devil in the Details investigated the relationship between conflict, food security, and climate, and it revealed that higher food prices increase rates within markets and conflict increases food prices. And what is notable is that anomalies, dry conditions are associated with the with increased frequencies of conflict. Now, there is also SAFE's 2021 study on the impact of climate change and agriculture on food security in the Greater Horn of Africa, revealing that climate change has a direct link between drought and famine. If you look at all these 3 studies, these reports are not specific to either Uganda as a country or Karamoja as a region. So that is the reason why I would like to focus the study on in Karamoja. Why Karamoja? Karamoja is an interesting area with increasing temperatures, shifting rainfall patterns, and droughts that feature in it. And then these impacts are usually exacerbated by climate change. That is according to the FAO report 2019. Now, this climate change variability poses direct and indirect impacts. As you can see, the water scarcity, intensifying conflicts being a pastoral area, and then this undermines the livelihood security of the. Also, the annual drought phenomena experienced in the area, that is internal and external. I mean, the annual drought phenomena lead to internal and external seasonal livestock migrations within Karamoja and to the neighboring areas. And as a result, you realize that there's also drought conditions in northern Kenya, forcing the pastoralists from Kenya to come and permanently stay in Karamoja. That is the Turkana and the Pokot. For the last 10 years, they have been there. Then as a result, the resource use conflicts, livestock raids and thefts, and then spread of livestock diseases is inevitable. So in relation to food security, Karamoja has experienced devastating droughts. For example, the 1980 drought and the 2005 and 2006 and then 2010. But in particular, for the 2010 drought conditions, they caused agricultural economic losses of about $470 million in food crops and livestock alone, that is Karamoja inclusive, which is about 16% of the total annual value of agricultural products in 2021. So the aim of this is my aim was to investigate the causal linkages between climate change, conflict, and food security. This is the diagram that I developed to see how these 3 are related. You realize that climate change contributes to conflict contributes to climate change, to environmental change, and conflict and food security relationship is the commutative, the same to climate change and food security. So they affect each other. And of course, we have other factors like population growth contributing, the pastoral livelihoods, looking at the social, the human, the financial capital being in the center of all this. And then we have the cultural influence, the migration affecting the conflict and food security. And then for production factors, demand, access, and livestock crop bring the relationship between climate change and food security. So my research was conducted in Karamoja and Teso subregions in 4 districts covering 12 sub-counties. And the respondents were purposefully selected based on their knowledge and technical expertise on the thematic areas. I looked at the elders, I looked at the government representatives and development partners. For the climate change data, I looked at the literature review. The key, actually for all climate change, conflict and food security, the literature review, the key informant interviews, and food focus group discussions, and the narrations by knowledgeable people cut across. The only unique thing is that for the observations were made in relation to climate change and then food security. So that is the study area shown in green, and that was me interviewing one of the elders. That is the geographical scope that I just mentioned, 12 sub-counties, 2 sub-regions, and 4 districts there. So what are the findings? It is 100% acknowledged that the climate is changing over the last 20 years. What has been observed that there is increasing temperatures. There are longer drought periods to the level to about 5 months now. There is frequent and intense interseasonal dry spells that come after every 2 years. Rainfall onset has shifted from February, March to April, May. This reduces the rainy season from 2 to 1. And this rainy season lasts only 4 months. So even the cropping calendar has changed from June. So the narration is that in the past, there were 2 rainy seasons with optimal and consistent rainfall amounts. The first season commenced in February, and then the second season was in August to late November. And because of that, the rivers were perennially flowing. But now the situation has changed completely. The rainfall is no longer predictable, its onset, distribution, and quantities. The dry season has stretched, and then the rainfall, the late rainfall onset affects crop production. For instance, in 2009, the first rains were received in July, while in 2023, it was on the 10th of March. Then the second season is supposed to be from August to December, but it comes with flooding and no cultivation is done. For example, in 2007, there was too much rain that resulted in floods. And then also in 2021, rains did not come as usual. So another thing is the strong blowing winds with no defined direction associated. There is also thunder and lightning, which are very, very destructive. Then the pasture and water security and pasture and water scarcity have led to seasonal livestock migration to the neighboring regions. That is Teso for the Karamojong people. Now, for the conflict, I was able to realize five types of conflicts. The cattle raiding is the biggest, and then the thefts, the land and border conflicts. I have the resource use, that is pasture and water, and then the household. What is the narration here? That in 2019, I am picking the resurgence of the conflict as narrated by one elder. That in 2019, the Dodoth of Kabong raided the Turkana livestock of Kenya. And when they began stealing the livestock of the GA, that was the first attempt. So, the Dodoth and the Turkana combined effort and stole the livestock from Kotido. The army did not take it as a serious concern, so it ignored, and its potentials was underrated. So the GA successfully raided the Turkana in retaliation. And then later it was thought that maybe it was the Dodoth who did that, because the livestock were driven to GA through Dodoth. The GA again raided the Dodoth livestock, and that's how the Turkana realized that it was the GA who had previously raided them. So in retaliation, The Turkana then mobilized themselves in big numbers and raided Nakapelmuru. That is the biggest or the largest sub-county in Kotido or in Karamoja, and then prompting the GA to allege that the Turkana are actually collaborating with the Matheniko of Moroto. So consequently, the GA in the third attempt now went and mobilized for a raid to raid the Matheniko livestock at Kobebe. When the livestock were traced, it was realized that they were in the GA kraal, and the identification of the culprit was concealed, and the army had no option but to intercept all the livestock of that kraal. Then after that, the GA now had to mobilize massively and came and raided again more cattle from Moroto. So, and that actually sparked of the conflict. And then for the food security, for the food security, during the 2007 floods and the 2021, a lot of food was rotting in the gardens, and it was realized that because of elections, there was elections in 2016. So coupled with the flooding that took place, food insecurity looped in because people were not able to cultivate any food in fear that probably the government changes may bring in instability. So, and that led to the food insecurity situations in 2017 onwards. Now, what are the conclusions in this? We are seeing that more sorry. So what are the linkages now between climate change, food conflict, and food security? We realize that the conflict, food security interconnections are multidirectional, and that does change in climate and variability lead to conflict? Yes, it does, but to some extent and the rest. For example, climate change or variability is not a direct cause of conflict, but may lead to may lead to it, as attributed by Saife 2021. During dry season, that is in October to March, the long dry spells and prolonged droughts result into water and pasture scarcity for livestock and emergence of livestock diseases. So consequently, the pastoralists migrate out of the region to neighboring areas to look for pasture and water. Then, as a result, of course, we now experience the harder agricultural conflicts due to destruction of crops from gardens. And then the second conflict is the pasture use conflict because of large animals that are driven by the pastoralists to the neighbors, to the extent that one elder was saying that they are forced to pay 1,000 Uganda shillings per animal to water, or 500 to 1 million Uganda shillings for grazing, for our grazing area. So the third conflict is the cattle thefts and raids, because when thefts occur, there is counter cattle thefts because of retaliation, and this has been blamed to food insecurity in a place like Karamoja, and they utilize the chance when they are in Teso to do the stealing and livestock raids. Does conflict lead to environmental change? Yes. On a positive note, vegetation thrives during conflicts because people fear to go and cut trees. And then the army clears all vegetation, that's on a negative side, around their detaches for clear viewing of the enemies. This was the case during the Lord's Resistance War in 1990s and 2000. Does climate change lead to food insecurity? Yes, the long dry spells and or drought affect crop and livestock production through crop failures, leading to hunger and famine. And this also leading to hunger and famine, and then pasture and water scarcity leads to livestock deaths respectively. Does food insecurity lead to environmental change? Yes, during food scarcity, people cut trees for survival. And so one elder was quoted saying that hunger causes the cutting down of trees because people will be looking for firewood to buy food. Conflict leading to food insecurity, yes. During conflicts like cattle raids or rustling, people fail to focus on farming because they are busy running to safety. So that implies less food produced, and that translates to low harvest, hence food insecurity. So the crop producers relocated to safer places somewhere, and others were confined in one place. Consequently, there was hunger and production. This was noted by the representative. So in other words, there's also the livestock raids deprive local population of livestock, for which is the main livelihood. And then the livestock also act as oxen for plowing. And if there is no oxen, it means there is low food production, and low food production results to food insecurity. So the GIZ representative noted that the cause of the recent 2022 famine was because of cattle rustling, which occurred since 2019, where people lost livestock. That is the story I narrated about the resurgence. Household conflicts like domestic violence, fights and quarrels lead to family separation. And that means there are few members available to do the cultivation. Does food insecurity lead to conflict? Yes. Lack of food at home forces people to go and steal or raid what to eat or sell to get money to buy food again. Then those who lose their livestock to raids also go and raid from elsewhere. The revenge ends up escalating to raids. This is confirmed by one of the focus group discussions saying, yes, anger forces someone to go and raid and causing conflict. Then lack of food at home makes people unhappy and causes unnecessary quarrels and fights. Hey. Sorry. Okay. Then, so what are the conclusions? We've observed that the climate has changed over the last 20 years with negative impacts on livelihoods. Migration and grazing patterns have changed. Cattle raids and land conflicts have intensified recently due to commercialized trading and political interference. Karamoja is perennially food insecure from January to June, while Teso is moderately food insecure. The harsh climate and livestock raids are negatively affecting food security. And food insecurity results from a combination of drought and conflict. So that when there is insufficient rains, which causes crop failures and pasture water scarcity, insufficient food and water for humans results. So a hungry man cannot just watch when things take place, but will do anything to raid from those who have, and raids result in two cyclic conflicts due to retaliation and revenge. The famine situation, which is a period of no food, that when there is no food at home, it results to domestic violence, and this leads to family separation and disintegration. In a quest for livelihoods, food security and livelihoods, the environment is damaged owing to people cutting trees for survival. And this threatens the vegetation functions of the microclimate conditions, rain attraction, windbreaks, and soil and water conservation. So what are some of the interventions that have been done? The youth, like these are the local interventions that the Karamojongs utilize to manage, like in terms of climate change and food insecurity. The youth are sent by elders to search for water and to search for new sites. The excavation is done to establish riverbanks. And then the desilting is also done. Rationing of water is done. Joint and rotational livestock watering is done by women and youth. Incarnations, that is the traditional prayer, is said by the Council of Elders. Then there's water source protection, collection of water user fees, rehabilitation, and then prior to outward migration, elders organize community planning meetings and participate in negotiation meetings for water and pasture within the would-be host. So how do we defuel climate conflict in drylands? To minimize annual seasonal livestock migration and consequent conflicts in a changing climate, we recommend the following: that water provision should be by drilling of more boreholes, rehabilitation of non-functional ones, and establishment of water flow schemes through motorization to address water challenges. Desilting of existing colonial dams, they have others that they already know. that are listed there. They also feel the establishment of more dams in grazing areas should be done by government and development partners. And then through the water interventions, we realize that we shall be addressing 3 critical issues: water availability for the Karamoja region, conflict prevention or minimization between the Karamojongs and the Iteso, and then flood reduction in the Teso. And then another issue is environmental conservation bylaws, and enforcement is very key. So that was the fieldwork that I did, the different focus group discussions. This photo here with the water, that is the convergent zone for where the pastoralists migrate and water their livestock from. That was me in the kraals together with the elders. Now there is encroachment of land. You can see that grass-thatched house is right in the middle of the road, and on my right there is a water body here, and that hut is right almost inside this water body. Where I am standing, there is a large chunk of land which is owned by only one person. It's like around 20,000 acres. And yes, of course, livestock being the backbone of the region. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Betty. That was an insightful presentation. Thank you. Like I said earlier, let's reserve our questions to the last 10 minutes. Betty, could you please put down your slides? Can you stop sharing?
Okay.
Thank you.
Is that okay? Is it out?
It's not out yet, but let me.
Oh gosh, okay.
Let me share mine.
Oh, okay. There you are.
Okay. All right. You all see my screen. I'm presenting next.
Yes,
Please let me know if you can see. Thank you. All right. My name is Uche Okpara. Let me adjust this a bit. Hold on. Sorry. Okay, my name is Uche Okpara. I'll be speaking to you about thermal discomfort and conflict in tropical drylands. So thermal discomfort is one area of climate conflict study that hasn't been effectively studied. Okay, so I'm bringing dimension called cognitive or psychosocial, dimension of the climate conflict nexus. So now I'm asking, is rising thermal discomfort a concern in drylands? Rising thermal discomfort experienced by dryland populations, does it contribute to conflict? Does it increase conflict rates in any way? And like we know from the 2 previous presentations, dryland populations are thermally unsafe. They are not thermally safe in a heated world. So, and their continuous exposure to heat stress constitutes a public safety threat. So my goal here is to investigate how and whether year-to-year shifts in outdoor thermal discomfort can contribute to or increase conflict rates. Now, on the screen, I'm showing you the framework I used in trying to model or understand the connection between thermal discomfort and conflict. I will revisit this model as I progress in the discussion. So there are 3 hypotheses that underpin this research. One is rising thermal discomfort leads to higher conflict outcomes during wet and dry season. The next is rising dry land population pressure increases the rate of violent conflict in the presence of economic, political, agricultural, and ecological factors. The third hypothesis is significant rise in the number of dryland populations experiencing thermal discomfort leads to increase in the rate of conflict. So I'll be examining these three hypotheses in the course of this presentation. So now, what is thermal discomfort? Thermal discomfort conveys a sense of physical strain, psychological uneasiness or distress, and this is usually associated with exposure to excessive cold conditions or hot conditions. And thermal discomfort is about too hot or too cold conditions. So it's a state of uncomfortableness or dissatisfaction within the thermal environment. And how do you understand, or how do you determine human thermal discomfort? So we look at the heat exchange between the human body, that's metabolic heat production, and the thermal environment, that's the outdoor climate, and then the clothing insulation, the clothes we wear. So these three elements help us to determine human thermal discomfort: metabolic heat production, outdoor climate, and clothing insulation. Now, looking at past research in terms of theories and pathways and research gaps, thermal discomfort has been measured over time using biometeorological and social indicators, as you can see on the screen. And it has been extensively studied in different contexts in terms of human health, building design, energy demand, occupational safety, and labor productivity. And the nearest scholarly effort to link thermal discomfort to conflict was through thermal or heat stress hypothesis. So no study so far, to my knowledge, has been able to link thermal discomfort to conflict. Many of the studies I've seen so far focused on heat stress, and they used the heat stress hypothesis. So, but heat is not thermal discomfort. Heat can lead to thermal discomfort, but heat is not thermal discomfort. So we know a lot about how heat is linked to conflict. For example, through when there is uncomfortable hot temperature, this can induce, significant bodily discomfort, and that might create that might aggravate psychosocial challenges such as anxiety, mood disorder, aggressivity, rage, and all of this can fuel tension and violence. So if we look at the climate security studies and environmental peace building studies, the notion of, or the idea of thermal discomfort has been undermined. So thermal discomfort has been underappreciated, and it remains under researched. Okay, so my study is bringing a new idea, and try to see how thermal discomfort could be understood, in the context of conflict. So why tropical dryland? Drylands, of course, we know are hotspots of climate change and conflict from the two presentations we have had so far. And in looking at this nexus, the nexus of thermal discomfort and conflict, I chose the Lake Chad region as a test bed, a dynamic test bed that could help us understand the way in which thermal discomfort might interact with conflict. So the first presenter, Rejoice Papka, has told us a lot about the Lake Chad region. So I won't waste time talking about the Lake Chad. So now, let me go to the method. In terms of methods, a wide range of data we have collected. So if you look at this framework, firstly, data on conflict was collected. I focused on rebel and communal conflict, which are the predominant, conflict types in the region, in the Lake Chad region. And then I sourced for data on poverty, cropland changes, political instability, population pressure, and then thermal discomfort, was computed as an index using a range of data on conflict, data on clothing insulation, and metabolic rate. So conflict data came from different sources: ACLED, Uppsala Conflict Data Program, Social Conflict Analysis Database, and Global Terrorism Database. So this is the equation that I used in computing thermal discomfort index. So I have five references beneath on my screen here, and these 5 authors, actually suggested, this equation, and the equation, of course, contains, temperature and clothing insulation. Clo here means clothes, clothing insulation. Met here also means human metabolic rate. So all of these elements form part of the way in which thermal discomfort can be measured. So temperature data came from different sources as well, but particularly from the Met stations across Chad, Nigeria, Niger, and Cameroon. Clothing insulation. So there is usually a standard unit, a standard value attached to the type of clothes we wear across seasons. So as you can see on the screen, this author, Gordon, developed this model, a typical way of looking at what people wear across different seasons and the clothing insulation value or clothes unit that we can attach to what people wear. So the summer clothing has a different value, has a different clothing insulation value, to compared to winter clothing. So for a Lake Chad region, people wear loose fitted clothes. Okay, and so I and my team, having worked in the Lake Chad region for so many years, we adopted a value of 0.8 to represent the clothing insulation unit of value for the region. So for metabolic rate, metabolic rate, it talks about human activity level. Okay, so in the Lake Chad region, a lot of people are engaged in farming, in hunting, in fishing, in herding, in biking. Okay, and there are standard, units or values that are attached to the activity level. And as you can see from on your screen, if you are running, your activity level is high, your metabolic rate will be high, and there's a unit that can be attached to that. So across the Lake Chad region, we checked the various activities people undertake, and then using this model, we came to a conclusion that a value of 6 could be representative of different farming, fishing, activity level that people engage in the region. So we used a metabolic value of 6. And this is an overview of the way in which thermal discomfort is associated with temperature. Okay, so if for example we have 40 degrees to 45 degrees, we have a situation of intense discomfort. And if the temperature is above 54 degrees, there could be extreme chronic discomfort. And in the Lake Chad region, of course, the temperatures are usually very high. So people there experience thermal discomfort, of different level across different seasons of the year. Okay, so looking at the yearly average thermal discomfort for the Lake Chad region, I discovered that across the year, using yearly average trend, there is intense discomfort. People experience intense thermal discomfort across the year. So, and then looking at the seasons, so seasonal trends shows dangerous thermal discomfort during the wet season. So people tend to be more thermally, discomforted during the wet season compared to the dry season. Population data, party data, school instability data, crop data, all of this came from different sources. The majority came from the Lake Chad Basin Commission. There's a commission called the Lake Chad Basin Commission who handles, the resources and the research across the Lake Chad region. So they keep a lot of data on different socioeconomic factors. So I was able to gather a few of these data from them. In terms of estimation procedures, I applied negative binomial regression. This enabled the modeling of counts of conflict events because of the over-dispersed, patterns observed in the conflict data. The conflict data appear to be highly highly skewed, towards recent years, and there's also an absence of excess number of zeros in the conflict count data. And then multiplicative interactive procedure, was used as well to combine, thermal discomfort and population change. I won't go into all the econometric jargons and the complexity around estimation procedures that we applied in this study. I'll quickly go straight to the results. So now, the research is about thermal discomfort and conflict. So looking at the summary statistics, conflict during the wet season appears to be higher compared to the dry season. And rebel conflict is pervasive, okay, and it is well reported compared to, communal conflict. Wet season thermal discomfort is higher as well compared to dry season thermal discomfort. So that means people experience more thermal discomfort during the wet season compared to dry season. Hypothesis 1, does rising thermal discomfort lead to higher conflict? So, across the model and the analysis conducted, I discovered that wet season thermal discomfort and average thermal discomfort across the year contribute positively and significantly to total rebel conflict. So wet season thermal discomfort contributes to rebel conflict and not communal conflict. That's one interesting finding. And another finding is for hypothesis 2, does rising dryland population pressure increase conflict rates? So the result shows relatively strong, positive, and statistically significant association between population density, prior year population density, and communal conflict. So here, population density contributes and increases communal conflict rate, and not rebel conflict. Now, for the third hypothesis, here I looked at thermal discomfort and population. So if there are increasing number of people experiencing thermal discomfort, would that lead to increase in conflict rates? Now, the result here is a bit surprising. Even though hypothesis 1 shows that wet season thermal discomfort leads to rebel conflict, hypothesis 2 shows that high population density leads to communal conflict. So if we bring population density and thermal discomfort, the combination of these two, would that lead to conflict? So in the study, I discovered that the combination of thermal discomfort and conflict do not support hypothesis 2. Hypothesis 3. So that means the interaction of prior year average thermal discomfort and population density does not contribute to rebel and communal conflict. Now, this result, like I said, was surprising to us, and because of that, we had to convene a workshop in February last year. So we called, stakeholders across the region to help us better understand, the puzzle, so to speak, from our study. So in the analysis we did, we used 21 years data, okay, from 2020 to 2021. But when we met the stakeholders to validate our results, this policeman in particular told us that 21 years data do not capture the historical context of the region. So heat waves, thermal discomfort of the 1970s and 1980s did not contribute to conflict. So what then is happening currently? So he said, rising population and more heat stress experienced in recent years amplifying, conflict. And he also mentioned that there are other factors which we didn't capture in the analysis. For example, electricity power supply, cut down, blackout or power cuts in homes and communities. This is an important factor, according to the policeman, that should be captured in this kind of an analysis, because people sometimes, when they experience power cuts, they begin to feel discomforted from their home before they get into communities. And then thermal discomfort is higher during wet season. Why is that the case? Okay, so other stakeholder told us that yes, thermal discomfort is higher during the wet season and not dry season. So originally, when we started the study, our thinking was, okay, people will feel more thermally discomforted when the season is dry, during the dry season. But we discovered the case is different. So wet season leads to higher thermal discomfort. Why is that the case? So this stakeholder told us that during the wet season, there is high humidity. Of course, there's plenty of water in the air. Okay, and there's also elevated temperature because the area generally is a hot area. Okay, so the combination of high humidity and elevated temperature impedes the evaporation of sweat. And we know that sweating is the body's primary means of heat dissipation. So when sweat cannot escape, this can lead to a sensation of increased warmth and discomfort. So this is the narrative this stakeholder gave us to help us understand why thermal discomfort appears to be, higher during the wet season. And then in terms of why wet season see more conflict, why do we have more conflict in the wet season and not dry season? The speaker before me, Betty, told us that conflict happens in Uganda, in Karamoja, more during the dry season. But in the Lake Chad region, there seems to be, a situation where, the wet season tends to create more, insecurity in the region. So why is that the case? So we asked the people, and they told us that in the wet season, there's an increase in human activity around natural resources. So the soil is moist and fertile. People are looking for farmland, farm work. There is increase in fishing activities, and with the increased human association and interaction, conflict tends to erupt. And also during the wet season, policing is usually difficult. Okay, so this is the explanation they gave as to why the wet season tends to be more conflictual, sort of. Okay, conclusion. My time is up. So wet season thermal discomfort, yearly average thermal discomfort leads to more rebel attacks and not communal conflict. The likelihood of conflict increasing is higher where a large number of dryland populations experience thermal discomfort. So population density actually leads to more communal conflict and not rebel conflict. Workshop participants confirmed that rising population and more heat stress experienced by dryland populations in recent years are amplifying the conflict effects of thermal discomfort. So now what is the puzzle? I conclude here. So why do wet season thermal discomfort? Why should we see more of rebel conflict and not thermal and not communal conflict during the wet season? That's the puzzle here. Okay, wet season, more rebel conflict and not communal conflict. Why is that the case? Does it mean that the rebel groups feel more thermally distressed during the wet season, and the rebel groups use the wet season and the thermal discomfort they feel, to drive insecurity in the region? So this puzzle is part of what I am looking at in terms of how do we defuel, conflict in the region. So I will stop here. This research is ongoing, and the next stage of the work will be to engage rebel groups to better understand their perception, there are a lot of rebel groups who have been former rebel groups who have been captured and who are in prison at the moment. So we are making arrangements to find a way to interview them to also get their perspective about trauma discomfort and whether the evidence we got from the field, from the workshop, and also from interaction from our workshop and also from data collection, actually represent the real situation in the region. So thank you so much. I will stop here, even though I used extra 3 minutes. So thank you so much. So Abubakar, you will take over now as the next speaker. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Share my screen. Right. Hello, good afternoon. Let me start by asking this question. Have you ever wondered and imagined how a solution turns out to be worse than the problem? This is the case of adaptation strategies in the drylands. Having posed this question, my name is Abubakar Ibrahim. I'm a PhD research student at Natural Resources Institute, University of Greenwich. My research is on a comparative vulnerability assessment for strengthening adaptive capacity and food security of rural communities in Kebbi State, northern Nigeria. However, for the purpose of this conference, I just have an extract of my research, which has to do with developing conflict-sensitive approaches for climate change adaptation in fragile environments like Kebbi State in northern Nigeria. And the previous speakers have done justice in the sense of trying to provide the nexus between climate change and conflict, food security, climate change and conflict, and also have already established from fact that indeed the climate has changed, especially in these dryland areas, and it has affected quite majority of people in that part of the world. But what is more interesting to me is what makes them more, why is it that people in sub-Saharan Africa are the most affected people? And if you look at it, it has been established that their system has been exposed and the system is as well sensitive to the changes in climate. But what really makes them extremely more affected than other people from other parts of the world is the fact that they lack the adaptation strategies. They lack the adaptive capacity to reduce the impact of these changes in climatic events. And that also combined with the non-climatic stressors of poverty, insecurity, conflict, and other things. Now, from the literature, we can see that the future is not even bright for this part of the world, because by the year 2050, 25 to 90% of the situation is going to get worse. So it's like a trajectory. It's getting higher and higher and higher. And as I've said earlier, it has everything to do with their lack of adaptation strategies. The capacity is not there. And what is being used currently is insufficient for future climate change and conflict, especially looking at what is obtainable now. Now, Kebbi State, then why Kebbi State? If you look at the map by my right, you understand that Kebbi State is quite an important setting, and it's a setting that reveals a lot as far as my research is concerned. One is within the fringes of the dryland, and secondly, it shares two international borders. It's not every Nigerian state that shares two international borders. It shares border with Niger Republic, which is extremely dried, and also with from the north, and it shares border with Benin Republic from the south. And I chose Kebbi State because of its uniqueness. It is one of the most cosmopolitan states in western northwestern Nigeria, because majority of the population belong to the ethnic groups called Hausa Fulani, and you also have other ethnic groups who are not Hausas, and majority of whom are not even Muslims. So I chose Kebbi State because I want to see the disparity, what are the cultural influence on the impact of some of these changes, and how do people look at it based on their cultural affiliation. Now, what is adaptation strategy? From the literature, adaptation strategy simply means anything you use that is aimed at reducing or preventing harm, and also taking beneficial opportunities. And because we have different livelihood groups with different interests, with different practice, and majorly reside in the same environment, and in most instances share the same common resources, that create interest, and that interest, if not really managed, can result into conflict. And in most cases, the adaptation strategy of one livelihood group affect the other livelihoods negatively because they relied on the same resources. And in most cases, it creates the consequences of maladaptation. And if you look at the findings from Bobritsky and Okpara, there are certain external conditions. For example, in societies where you have lack of injustice and inequity in forms of social and economic or environmental political conditions, that exacerbate the condition, the suffering of these people, and also fuel conflict. And as I'm going to explain further, we'll see the linkage between this. The research used more of a mixed method, where I combine both qualitative and quantitative methods of data collection to collect data from the respondent. However, the research is qualitatively driven, and that is why we use two techniques of qualitative data, where I had a focus group session with members of the three livelihood groups. And these three livelihood groups in focus are dryland farmers, pastoralists, and artisanal fisherfolk. So we had focus group sessions with them at different locations. And also we had in-depth interview with key informant. By key informant, I mean people that have to do with these three livelihoods at governmental level. And we pick them at three levels because agriculture, which is the mainstay of the three livelihood, is on the concurrent list. It's at federal level, state, and local government level. These are three tiers of government in Nigeria for those people who are not familiar with that. So we interviewed government officials at the three level to see especially the institutional intervention programs on helping these people to adapt to the changes in climate. Now, what are the impact of this of climate on the livelihood of these three livelihood groups? If you can look at this picture, you realize how dry this place is, and you begin to imagine this is a pastoralist who is taking his livestock to graze. And I keep asking myself, what is he grazing on? Where is the pasture? Because this looks dry. So this denotes the impact of climate change on the livelihood of the pastoralist. They have no pasture, especially at towards around November, December, January, February, March. It's completely dry in this part of the land. And also, if you look at it here, you can see how dry the soil is, despite you can see a green area, which is a rice nursery, but it's at a river bank where some of these dryland farmers engage in irrigation farming as a form of adaptation strategy. But what makes me bring this picture is to look at, this is a road where the pastoralist can pass, and you can imagine an animal looking at a green grass close to him, and he is hungry. Then imagine that in your brain, what would happen, even if it is a human being, not to talk of animal, who it's captivating, isn't it? Then by this young artisanal fisher folk, you can see the struggle they go through to get fish. This is mud, and this is where they get this fish from. And when I spoke to them at that time, they spend close to 12 hours on the water to get this number of fish in the basket. And at the center is myself at an abandoned pastoral settlement who were forced to migrate because of the conflict that ensured between dryland farmers and pastoralists in Gwandu Access in Kebbi State. So that, in summary, have tell us in concrete terms the impact of climate change on the livelihood of the three cohorts, the groups. Now, as it is from time immemorial, it has been established in the literature that human beings have faced a lot of challenges, and they don't just fold their arms. They have to do something to adapt or to fit into the condition they find themselves, just like what we have experienced in recent times, the COVID-19, where some scholars are saying we should learn to live with it. Then how do you learn to live with it? You have to create some adaptation strategies to adapt to the new normal as we have it. And it has been established by the previous speakers that climate change is real. It affects the African society negatively. So therefore, what adaptation strategies are there for these people to look at? Within the context of my research, we try to divide the adaptation strategies into two, where we have the autonomous adaptation strategy as well as the planned adaptation strategies. By autonomous adaptation strategy, we are referring to what is commonly used in the literature as indigenous adaptation strategy. But I try to run away from using the concept indigenous because it's highly contestable, especially within the African setting. Who is an indigenous, who is not? So we use autonomous adaptation strategy. By autonomous, we are referring to those strategies that came from within these livelihood groups, that is not as a result of any expert or any government intervention or whatever. And the planned adaptation strategy is that which comes from the formal settings, from government, NGOs, and other stakeholders within the agricultural industry. When you look at the first picture, it's a picture of a farm in a dry setting. If you look far away from the green area, you can see how dry the land is. But this is like an irrigation farming, a dry season farming, which a majority of those communities visited who have any river close to them, with the exception of few who don't have water resources engaged in. This is one of the adaptation strategy used by these people. Then you have also expansion of farmlands, which also create a lot of, it generates conflict between especially the livelihood groups of the farmers as well as the pastoralists. Because of climate change, there is dwindling yield from the agricultural produce. As in many of my interaction with the farmers, dryland farmers, they have attested that 15, 20 years ago, you can farm 100 sacks of maize, millets, or rice, but in recent times, you'll be lucky to have 5, 6. And that really create a precarious situation for them. And one of the strategies they use in order to have more yield is to expand your farmlands. And how do they expand the farmlands? Sometimes at the expense of the other livelihood groups. For example, in many communities where there is evidence of conflict, it's as a result of these farmers expanding their farmlands into cattle routes, where these pastoralists move with their cattle to grazing areas or to water their animals. And if you reflect back to your memory, back to the previous picture where I have shown the rice nursery and the road, you can see how that creates conflict. And every year by year, these farmers moved in to the cattle roots, and they keep shrinking the cattle roots. And you can imagine if you have a number of cattle and you can't be able to pass without venturing into the farmlands, and that creates conflict. And one of the other strategies is most of the farmers are resorting to drought resistant crops. For example, millets, the red beans, cassava, and the rest, which are more drought resistant. Then they also cultivate vegetables, especially during dry season. For example, this farm is a vegetable farm where carrots, where onions, where pepper, where tomatoes and the rest are being cultivated. And according to some farmers, it's even provide them with more income than the rainy season farming, because those commodities are more expensive during dry season than during the rainy season. And as we are going to discuss further, one of the strategies is selling these farm residues. Initially, when we have more of a cordial system between the two livelihood groups, especially dryland farmers and pastoralists, farm residues are something that the pastoralists get for free in exchange of animal dung to fertilize the farmlands. But in recent times, due to dwindling resource and depletion in these resources, and the income level is increasingly going down and down day by day, they have to resort to selling these farm residues to the pastoralists in exchange for money. And also one of the strategy is migration, especially to areas which have more fertile land than where they are. It's quite puzzling for me. During my field work, I sat somewhere in Zuru, and I keep seeing lorries of grains with the women folk on top going through the town. And I was curious to ask one of my local guide, and he said it's like grand seasonal migration by especially the women folk who are very hardworking in that part of the world, who goes to the neighboring state, Niger State, to farm, and they are not going to return till after harvest. And this is the produce they are bringing back to Zuru town, and they are going back at the beginning of rainy season. It's a routine thing for them. Now, looking at the pastoralists, they have these strategies as migration. They migrate, which is something that it's synonymous with the pastoralist in all parts of the world. They migrate, especially in Africa, sorry, where they migrate based on searching for fodder and water for their animals. And this is a cycle where in northern Nigeria, they migrate when the north is extremely dry towards the south, and when it's too rainy because of tsetse fly and other things that affect the animals, they have to go back to the north where there is fodder then for their animals to graze and stuff like that. Then majority of them, from the statistics we have seen, because I categorize the pastoralists into transhumans as well as agro-pastoralists, but from the data you can see more than 80% of the pastoralists are now agro-pastoralists, because they cannot solely rely on pastoralism and feed their family. They have to combine agriculture with pastoralism. And for the artisanal fisher folk, it's fish farming. For example, this is an artisanal fisher folk I'm having interviews with, and you can see containers here, which is fingerlings in it, where these are small fishes that are being catch from the river. It's close to the river bank in Yauri, which is River Niger. And the artisanal fisher folk usually buy this and create an artificial pond at home where they put these fingerlings, feed them with the fish feeds till when it's time for them, when there's a need for them to harvest and sell and feed their family, especially when the catch is low. Now, what is the conflict dynamic? How does this adaptation strategies create conflict? And what is the pattern of this conflict in Kebbi State? it has been established from the data collected that this conflict revolves around sharing of common pool resources. And what are these common pool resources? You have the river, water banks, ponds, and lakes, and resources of that nature where the three livelihoods relied on. For example, the farmers relied on it for irrigation, the artisanal fisher folk for fishing, and the pastoralists to water their animals. In a particular case, for example, if you look at this graph, you realize that Yauri, which is local government, have the highest in terms of resource in this conflict. Why do we have this? From my interaction with both the key informant and the livelihood groups, in most of the local government, because of the frequent reoccurrence of this conflict, especially among pastoralists and dryland farmers, they create a standing committee, which is more like a local arrangement between traditional institutions and members of these livelihood groups and other key government representatives, like representative of the chief judge of the state, the police, the civil defense, and others, which at the beginning of the rainy season will sit down and ask the farmers, when do you expect to start farming? And you ask all the pastoralists to begin to move away from the farmlands, so that the farmers will have more time to farm and without any destruction from the pastoralists. And that seems to work. And at the end of harvest, the farmers will be given time to take away all their produce from the farmland, so that the pastoralists will come back from their migration, so that they can use the farmlands, the residues, and the rest to graze their animals. But in Yauri, because it's not something that frequently occurred, and even in the literature, you hardly find writing crisis between artisanal fisherfolk and pastoralists or farmers. But in Kebbi State, in Yauri in particular, this is one of the dynamics that have come into view, because it's something that is new. It's not known. Conflict between artisanal fisherfolk and dryland farmers is something that has not been in existence in that part of the world. But due to climate change and the pressure on these common pool resources, this has come to stay now. And because there is no any committee set up to settle this conflict, that is why there is frequent reoccurrence of this conflict at violence level. I was interviewing, and I was curious to ask further what really triggered this conflict. And I was told by members of this artisanal fisherfolk group that because of the government policy towards rice production in Nigeria, the attention is given to these people. And during dry season, the only place where you can cultivate rice, because it needs a lot of water, is towards the riverbank. And for them, the riverbank is so important because that is where the fish deposit its eggs and hatches. And as soon as these dryland farmers venture into that area, they are adapting to the changes in climate, but destroying the livelihood of their neighbors, who are the artisanal fisherfolk. And that's what triggers the conflict. And also from our findings, we realize this conflict is inter and intra. There is conflict between the livelihood groups, and there is conflict within the livelihood groups. For example, in Yauri, where you have more conflict, you have artisanal fisherfolk who migrate from other part of the world, part of the country, even from as far as Senegal and Mali, to fish in that area. And according to the indigenes of that area, their fishing method is actually killing the fish in the river. And as such, in multiple cases, there was conflict between the indigenes and the migrant artisanal fisherfolk.
So please, can you start summarizing?
All right.
Can you just 1 minute, and you can, yes, just use 1 minute and summarize, please. Your time is
all right. Also, important to mention here is the conflict also is not, it's not just about someone taking away your what belongs to you or not giving you what you deserve. But the institutional intervention programs also tend to trigger conflict in this area because according to pastoralists and artisanal fisherfolk, most of the government intervention, because of the government policy on food production and other things, tend to targets more of dryland farmers and ignoring the other two livelihood groups. And one of the participants gave me a hypothetical example that if you have 3 children and whatever you bring home, you give it to one of the children, you are creating rivalry and envy between the two groups. Said my time is almost off. As I've mentioned earlier, these are some of the strategies that ensure conflict. I've mentioned expansion of farmlands into roots and grazing reserves, then riverbank where farmers cultivate there. Then one other thing is the artisanal fisherfolk now dig farmlands, especially towards the swampy area, to get this earthworm, which they use as bait to catch fish. And that destroyed the farmland of the farmers, and that also ensured conflict. Intrusion into migration also has its own consequences, because you migrate into areas that it's not yours, and the people are quite hostile to this pastoralists because they believe they are here to destroy our farmlands and stuff like that. And these are the recommendations. Part of the recommendations, we believe it's vulnerabilities. The livelihoods are vulnerable at different levels. So therefore, and government and other stakeholders should treat these people as a unique livelihood, not this kind of one trigger solution, which would not really solve the problem. And there should be a fair treatment of all livelihood groups. One livelihood group should not be favored over the others. Then protection, recovery of the grazing reserves and cattle routes that has been encroached by either farmers or corporate land grabbing from politicians. Then we should foster peaceful coexistence between the two, because it benefits all the livelihood groups. Inclusivity in terms of decision making, there should be participatory and other things. Then traditional institutions have a crucial role to play, because they are the most closest to the people, and they understand the culture as well as values of this livelihood group, so that the mechanisms and informal or traditional conflict resolution mechanism, which is devoid of rancor and acrimony of the modern one, will make sure that it's more of reconciliatory than punishment and reward.
All right, thank you. Yeah. Just
right.
conclude. You can conclude, and then we'll.
All right. In conclusion, the main aim of our panel is to create is how do we defoil conflict is in this fragile environment, and therefore it is the view of this research that if we have an all-inclusive policies and vulnerable groups are given particular attention, and if we include people in designing and implementation of these policies, and if the role given to traditional rulers had been empowered to solve this problem at local levels, then we are going to have a peaceful coexistence between these important livelihood groups. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Abubakar, for an insightful presentation. Please, can you pull down your slides now? Our time is fast spent, and I don't know. Rejoice, could you help coordinate the questions? We can take 1 or 2 questions.
Okay. Does anybody have any question or remark or any?